Hello, welcome to 10 Minutes On, a podcast from the Joint Public Issues team. My name's Sienna, I'm a Joint Public Issues team parliamentary intern. Joining me today is Steve Tinning, the Baptist Union Public Issues Enabler. He divides his working week between working for the Joint Public Issues team and the Baptist Union. Today, we're going to be talking about voting and voter registration. With a general election on the horizon sometime this year, this is a topic that's really important. So, to begin, before we jump into discussing voter registration in particular, Steve, could you tell me why you vote?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me why and not how. But yeah, absolutely I can. There are a number of reasons why I vote, but the two that I think are particularly pertinent for today are, one is that I'm just really acutely aware people talk about voting as a privilege. It isn't a privilege, it's a right. It's a right that all free adults over 18 have in the UK. And we mustn't forget that. And it was a hard-fought right. It's not always been the case. Pre-1918, women didn't have that right to vote. And we know something of the history of how hard-fought that was. And actually, pre-1918, some men didn't have the right to vote either. And so I think it's just knowing that we've got it, knowing that we live in this democratic society, using that vote is particularly important. But secondly, I just think as a Christian, there is a clear biblical reason to vote. That God has called us to seek the peace and the prosperity of the places in which we live, and He's called us to love our neighbour. And so I just can't imagine why it would be an option for Christians to be indifferent to the decisions that determine the well-being of our neighbourhoods and our neighbours. We've got this Let's End Poverty campaign running at the moment, haven't we, that's reminded us that 1 in 5 people across the UK are struggling against poverty, and that just a couple of years ago, almost 4 million people in the UK experienced destitution. And you may have other concerns around the NHS or migration or policing or economics or education, whatever it might be. You know, whether our neighbours live in poverty or not, whether they have access to good healthcare or not, whether they are kept secure or not, these are often, the consequences of political decisions. So voting for those who will ultimately make those decisions on behalf of us and our neighbours is for me vitally important. And what about you? Are there reasons why you particularly are keen to vote?
Yeah, well, firstly, it's great to hear. I think I really resonate with a lot of the reasons that you just gave for why you choose to vote. I completely agree with you in terms of the fact that it's a hard won right. Definitely. I think particularly as a woman, I look back at the suffragettes and I look at how much the rights of women in the UK have changed. And I do really think that being part of the political process by having a vote means that you're taken seriously by MPs because you keep them in their job. And I think that actually while we feel so small, because it's just one vote, actually those one votes make a difference. The other reason actually is that I grew up in countries where having a free and fair election wasn't a given. And so actually seeing people and they're seeing the fact that lots of people actually don't get a choice to elect the people who represent them, and how that has had like really, really negative impact on their lives. And you can see the way that corruption is just allowed to thrive and there's no accountability. It has kind of really hammered home for me how important voting is. And yeah, I always want to turn out partially in recognition of the kind of democratic struggles that are going on around the world, and in the recognition that that's like my country of birth has had lots of rigged elections, and I feel really privileged to be in a place where I can vote, and I know that my vote will be counted, and that will be part of electing the representative, and that nobody's rigging the election. But if that's why both of us vote, why is voter registration something that is actually important? Why is that something that people should be thinking about?
Yeah, we've both looked back to 1918, a year when 8.5 million women were given the right to vote for the first time in the UK. it might surprise you that 8 million people today won't be eligible to vote, not because it's illegal for them to vote, but because they haven't registered. That's just statistics from the Electoral Commission about last time's vote, that around 8 million weren't registered to vote. And so we just can't, that really saddens me. It's one thing that only 2/3 of people use their vote, but to think that you don't even have the right to it just because you haven't registered is really concerning. And so we really want to address that. There's another 4 million people who are eligible to vote but won't be able to because they're not aware that they need appropriate photo ID. This is something that's not new to elections. At last year's local elections, that was true, but it's the first general election this year where that will be in place. So we're really trying to raise awareness about those needs as well. And then there are another 14 million eligible voters who won't vote at the next general election on, that's the anticipated figure, because they're not motivated to turn out to vote. I believe me, I understand how the current environment of politics is something that is quite distressing and upsetting for a lot of people, but we cannot forget the importance of politics in our country, as difficult as it is. And so we're trying to do what we can to encourage people to use the vote that they have. And then the other thing just to say is that you're at greater risk statistically of not being able to participate in the democratic process if you're a non-UK national, if you rent your home, or if you've moved recently, but also if you're amongst certain demographics. If you're a young adult, you can be 16 in England, Wales to register to vote. Even though you can't vote until you're 18, you can register at 16. But if you're young, the chances are you might not have given this much thought. If you live in an economically disadvantaged community, if you're part of an ethnic minority, statistically, you are less likely to be registered to vote. And yet it's these marginalised communities, amongst others, that are often so impacted by the decisions made by those who are elected. So those are the sort of things that we're trying to address.
Yeah, that's so important. But you're saying those are the things we're trying to address. Can you tell us what JPIT is doing to address voter registration?
Yeah, so we're partnering with an organisation called Citizens UK that you might have heard of. They're a community organising a charity, but they are also behind another accreditation scheme called the Living Wage. So they've got a great history of mobilising people to register to vote, and also a good history of organising people into action around an accreditation scheme. So they've invented this new accreditation scheme called Voter Registration Champions. And the Baptist Union, the Methodist Church, the URC Church and the Church of Scotland are all ambassadors for this scheme now. So we are encouraging our churches to look into it and to register to become a voter registration champion. And when they do that, they're essentially committing to three things. The first is to run a voter registration campaign and to aim to get 100% of the church's eligible membership registered before the deadline, with at least a 90% success rate for your accreditation to hold, which is quite ambitious, but JPIT are working on some resources that will be available soon to help churches figure out exactly how they go about that in a way that isn't intrusive, but is just urging people to take seriously the registration and not to miss out. The second thing is to educate church members about the voter ID requirements and to make sure that they have what they need in place before the deadline. And then the third thing is, when the election is eventually called, but also in the local elections that are just around the corner, reminding church members about the election date and encourage them to use their vote in whatever way they want to use it. And then beyond that, there are certain other levels of accreditation that you can go for to extend your commitment beyond your immediate membership of your church to your fringe members and to your local community. But essentially, Citizens UK have a target to register 300,000 people in time for the next general election that otherwise wouldn't have been registered. And that's across churches, across universities, it's across all sorts of civic institutions. But specifically for us, we're keen to get our churches signed up and doing what is necessary to be accredited in this scheme.
Thank you. That sounds really helpful and also really clear in terms of how churches can be doing this. Very practical. Just a quick question. If churches are interested in this, where can they find out more? And also, are there any key dates that we need to think about in terms of voter registration?
Yeah, certainly go on the JPIT website and you'll find more information there, hopefully with some new resources that will go up to encourage our churches to put this into practice. I'm sure there'll be various pages on our own denomination pages, but if you want to look into voter registration champions directly, it's voterchampion.org.uk. You can find out all the information that you need there. And if you're not registered yourself, or if you want to encourage family members to register just off the basis of this, then www.gov.uk/register-to-vote will get you to the page where it takes 5 minutes to register. So those are the places I'd encourage you to visit.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's been really great chatting to you about this today, and definitely feels like something that's really important to be done when we look at, to be talking about and doing when we are facing so many huge global and national challenges, even though sometimes it can be quite bleak. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast today, please share it around. And for more information from the Joint Public Issues team, go to our website at jpit.uk. That's jpit.uk. Thanks for listening.